another session next week, and then our final session 8 the week after. And today is a very special session because we'll talk about the Bantu migrations, one of the most important movements of people in world history. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the history behind it and the archaeological evidence and linguistic evidence and oral history that we have connected to this topic. And then, in addition, you will get to see a preview of some of the work done by the summer teaching apprentices in the Coppin African Teachers Institute. And I'll explain more about what that is after we come back from our first break. So as always, these sessions are recorded. The first part, I will lecture for 25 minutes. Then we'll have a Q&A. Then we'll come back. You'll hear from the teaching apprentices. And then I'll lecture a little bit more, then we'll call it a day. Then we turn the recording off and we'll have general discussion about things that folks are interested in. So if you remember from last week we talked about here we go. We talked about the importance of archaeology. And we were talking about ancient West African history and how we can learn a lot from the archaeological record. Part of the importance of this period in West African history was the creation of new techniques for iron smelting and iron forging. This was when West Africa entered the Iron Age, and we talked about the importance of iron. That technology is going to spread from West Africa to Central Africa, South Africa, and East Africa during the Bantu migrations. And we know about this from the archaeological record. So the time period that we're going to talk about today is actually incredibly vast because the Bantu migrations start actually when this off of this timeline, around 3000 BCE. Actually, no, because we have Norman here. So around the beginning of this timeline, all the way up to about 1000 CE is when the bulk of these migrations happened. It wasn't one migration. There were multiple stops and fits and goes of this group of people. And this is the time period that we're talking about. But for today's lecture, we're going to spend most of our time around here, from around 0 to around 500 CE, that period. Because this is when the Iron Age really takes off and really transforms political, economic, and social relations throughout Central, South, and East Africa. But there were people in this region of Africa before the Bantu migrations. And we know that from archaeological evidence, linguistic evidence, and oral history. The mask you see here is from the Kuba Kingdom, which was in northern Congo. This mask is now in, I think this one is in the collection of Yale University, because a lot of our artwork is in places that aren't in Africa, but that's starting to change. And it's called a Pawum mask. A Pawum mask. Pawum masks were used in the Kuba Kingdom various times, various festivals, various initiation ceremonies, and it represented the original inhabitants of the region. Because although the political dominance of this kingdom that was in the Congo was done by Bantu-speaking people. So when we talk about the Bantu migrations, we're talking about migrations of people that speak Bantu languages and how they spread throughout Central, Southern, and East Africa. But this mask represents the people that were originally there. Before the Bantus came, they didn't migrate into an empty space. We have the history of the Twa people, the Batwa. These are what anthropologists, historians, and others erroneously call pygmies. We don't use that word pygmy because it's derogatory. A lot of the words that are used to describe African people and African culture are relatively derogatory. So we're moving away from that. So the Twa people of shorter stature that lived in the forested areas of Central Africa and Eastern Africa before the arrival of the Bantu. And one of the things that we'll get into today is what makes this migration so special. It's not just how vast the area that was covered and the cultural exchanges that happened, but the fact that it was done in a relatively peaceful manner. Unlike other migrations, human migrations throughout history, we can look at recent migrations of Europeans and others into the Americas and the destruction that wrought on the indigenous populations. You don't have evidence of that in Africa. You don't have evidence of that in the Bantu migrations. What you have are people coming together, exchanging cultures, exchanging ideas, and for much of the time, there was a lot of respect for the original inhabitants of the place, and they stayed in those areas. So since the Twa people were already there, the Bantu kingdoms and polities that arose in Central, Southern, East Africa, particularly Central and East Africa, recognized them as the original inhabitants of the land. And this mask represents those people, at least for the Kuba kingdom. So the evidence that we're relying upon, genetic evidence. We haven't really talked about genetics too much in this. I think the first week 1 we did, when we talked about early human civilizations in Africa. But genetic evidence. Studies have been done on people that live as far east as Kenya, as far west as Gabon, as far south as South Africa, and everything in the middle that tested people's genetics. And we found strong traces of particular genes associated with Bantu people. So we can actually trace the movement of Bantu people through genetics, and they're intermixing with Twa people, with Khoisan people, with other indigenous folks that lived in Central, South, and East Africa before the coming of the Bantu. So we can use genetic information to trace that movement. Of course, archaeological evidence, because one of the things that facilitate iron technology, and iron leaves behind a lot of archaeological evidence from, of course, iron tools. So if we have weapons, or if we have farming utensils made out of iron, we can still have those. The production of iron takes place in furnaces, and there's bellows, and there's charcoal residue, and the other refuge that's left behind from the iron producing process. So we have all of that archaeological evidence. Pottery. We talked about pottery last week when I smashed the plate. So we have a lot of that. Linguistic evidence, which we'll talk about. The Bantu language family is one of the largest, it's the largest language family in Africa and one of the largest language families in the world. Hundreds of other languages are associated with Bantu language, and they share a lot of similarities. So we can, again, trace the movement of people through linguistic evidence. Paleo-vegetation studies, what people were eating and how they were growing food, tells us a lot about the movement of people. Oral history can't take us back really far, but it gives us an understanding of how people understood this movement and how their culture was interpreted, even if it's for a modern time. What I mean by that is a lot of oral history tries to explain modern things. So oral history is used to explain the relationship between peoples, between, let's say, the Twa people and the Bantu kingdom, or between the Twa people and the Khoisan people in Southern Africa. Oral history is used to explain why people moved to a particular area. And we can connect that with the archaeological evidence and make some historical hypotheses based off of that. And then a limited amount of information, particularly for this time period, comes from the written record. The Greeks talk about their interactions with the Bantu people in East Africa. We'll talk about that text. There is a ancient Egyptian text that talks about the Twa people, because there were interactions between the Twa people and the ancient Egyptians. The Twa people, just like during the time of the Koba kingdom, which is thousands of years later, the ancient Egyptians understood that the Twa people were some of the oldest human populations. Even though they didn't have this evidence to prove that, they somehow knew that, and they honored the Twa people and brought them to Egypt, and as representatives of that early part of human history. And there is some Roman material about East Africa that we can rely on. Again, not a lot, but it exists. So again, the people that the Bantus came in contact with in the rainforest of Central Africa, we got the Ba. Ba, when you see Ba in Bantu language, that means people. So when you see Ba in front of something, Ba is the name. Ba means people, and then the next word is the name. So we're talking about the Twa people, the Ba Twa, the Ba Mbuti. So the Mbuti people, again, the Mbuti are more western forest dwellers, small in stature, that lived in the rainforest of Central Africa. The Twa, a little bit more toward the east, very similar in their cultures. very similar in their material cultures. They were masters of the forest. They could create poison strong enough to take down elephants. They were masters at net technology to trap prey, to trap food. They were hunters, they were gatherers. They lived in really egalitarian societies, meaning women and men shared political and economic and religious rights equally. Very equal societies. Lived off the land, looked at the earth as a womb in their culture. So they were, as a womb nourishes a baby in a woman's body, the earth nourished their community. So the earth was seen as a womb, and it's a spiritual feature in and of itself. A lot of indigenous people around the world share this understanding of their relationship with the earth. It's not one of exploitation, it's one of spiritual respect for the earth, and these folks had it. Further south, the folks that the Bantu would come in contact with in southern Africa are the Khoisan people. Again, another very ancient human population that we talked about at the beginning of the class. Very similar to the Batwa, except they're not short, but they live in various areas, but more desert areas, more savanna areas of southern Africa, and developed a hunting-gathering lifestyle. And there are people among these groups that in 2022 still live lifestyles very similar to this, and are fighting to maintain that existence against forces that are trying to, quote unquote, modernize them, which we really have to question, because what does that really mean? And is modern actually better? With how much destruction we've done to the planet, how much destruction we've done to each other, we should question that. But anyway, these were the folks that the Bantu came in contact with as they made these various migrations that started from Eastern Nigeria, Western Cameroon. Those are the modern political areas where this migration started from. Now, we don't know the exact reason as to why they left this area, but there is a number of hypotheses as to why. One, population growth. Because of what we talked about last week, the advancements that were made in Western Africa around the last few centuries before the Common Era and into the Common Era, farming techniques were advanced, iron technology was advanced, so you have more population. With more people, you got more pressure on the land, and you have more interpersonal conflict. So people moved. People say, I don't like the king anymore, or I don't like the chief anymore. I don't like how he's handling things. So instead of arguing and fighting over it, we'll just move. And this is reflected in a lot of the oral history. People said, we moved because we had conflict with so-and-so and so-and-so. So this family or this group of families decided to move on, start up another place. They took their iron technology, they took their farming techniques, and they moved to another area. Another reason could be climate change. So farming became untenable in some areas and people had to move. Iron ore is not an inexhaustible source. So if you're an iron producing community and you use iron a lot, you can exhaust the iron ore in the region. So you have to go find more iron ore. So that's another reason why people would move. So this is the general direction that these migrations took place. One, along the savanna area north of the rainforest connected to the Congo River. So people moved along this grassy area, they farmed, and then they picked up some other techniques, which we'll talk about in a second. And then another group of people went straight into the rainforest. They followed the rivers and went straight into the rainforest. They combined their farming with fishing and other techniques. They formed symbiotic relationships with the Batwa, meaning they would farm, they would create iron tools, they would share those with the Batwa, and the Batwa would give them the products of the forest: honey, animal skins, luxury items from the forest. So you had those interactions, and then they would go down. But we'll go back to this map in a second. I want to go to this. This is from 2200 BCE, and it comes from Egypt. And this is one of the first pieces of written history on the Batwa. Although this says Pygmy, this is because it was translated by some European a couple of decades ago. But the pharaoh writes to one of his officials who tells him about this trading expedition that he had, probably to Nubia. And he says, come northward to the residence immediately. leave everything and bring this pygmy with thee, which thou hast brought living, prosperous, and healthy from the land of Akito. And we're not really sure where that is. For dances of the god, to rejoice and gladden the heart of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Neferkare. May he live forever. So that's the name of the pharaoh. When he, the pygmy, goes down to the vessel, appoint trusty people who shall be about him on each side of the vessel. Take care lest he fall into the water. When he sleeps at night, appoint again trusty people who shall sleep about him in his tent. Inspect 10 times a night. My majesty desires to see this pygmy more than the produce of Sinai and Punet. If thou arrivest at the residence, this pygmy being with thee alive, prosperous, and healthy, my majesty will do for thee a greater thing than that which has been done for the treasurer of the god Werjej Deba in the time of Essie, in accordance with the heart's desire of my majesty to see this pygmy. This is how important this Batwa performer was to the pharaoh. He's like, I need everybody to watch this guy. Make sure he don't fall off the boat. Make sure he's taken care of, because I want to see this Twa performer come to ancient Egypt. And so this was written over 4,000 years ago. How much respect even the pharaoh had for these performers, these Twa performers that were coming from Central Africa. So it's very interesting. And you can see where this connection probably happened. The Twa people start to live here. We see, this is an old map. So it says Republic of Zaire, but this is DRC. So they're living here. Egypt had relationships with Nubia. So he probably traveled. It was connected with Nubia, was probably connected with Ethiopia. He came up the Nile, and when the pharaoh heard about him, he wanted him to come north to Egypt so that the pharaoh could see this performer dance for the gods. Because again, the ancient Egyptians realized somehow that the Twa people were very early human civilizations and had a very intimate connection to the earth, therefore an intimate connection to spirituality. So when they talk about the dance of the gods that this Twa person was going to be doing, it's very spiritually significant for the pharaoh to see that. All right, so early evidence. Again, as this migration went, making its way through Central Africa, and you see it's not a straight line. The two first branches come, they interact, they form communities, they form kingdoms. Some people settle down, some people keep moving, again, for those same type of issues. Interpersonal conflict, I don't like what the chief is doing. Me and my family, we're going to go move over here, take our farming tools, take this, what we've learned, move on. Population gets too big in a particular place because we're being so successful growing yams and growing millet and sorghum and all these different things that we're growing and creating, that the population gets so big that we got to move. We got to move. We got to find more places to live. So this group continued to go. Then they split up and went different places until eventually, between 0 and 1000 CE, people that started out in Nigeria, Cameroon area have now migrated, taking their language, their culture, which has changed over time. It didn't stay the same as it was in the origin point. It's morphed, but the language is pretty much still the same, or it still has some root words that we can trace linguistically to tell this is these are connected group of people. So we have professors like Shadrach Chirikure out of the University of Oxford, who does archaeology in Zimbabwe, which is one of the more southern points of this migration. So Zimbabwe is here, and he has shown that as the Bantus moved into Zimbabwe, they created civilizations like Great Zimbabwe and the Great Enclosure in Zimbabwe. So this was built a little bit after our time period, because our class stops at 711 CE. And this was built between 900 CE and all the way up to about 1200 CE. They were still building this and adding things to it. But this is one of the largest stone structures in the world, and it's actually 3 different sites. But his archaeology has shown that even before these massive buildings were constructed, you had people living there, farming there, and they were Bantu speakers. We know that from the archaeological record, from the pottery, and the oral history, and the language that is spoken there among the Shona people today, because these are the ancestors of the Shona people that live in Zimbabwe. And he, like many other African archaeologists, had to do a lot of work in the late 20th century because when this was first, quote unquote, discovered by white Europeans, they said, oh, yeah, a great race of white people built this structure and then left Africa. Literally, that's what was said in these history books. So you had African archaeologists and, truthful white archaeologists come along and say, no, that's not true. These things were actually built by Bantu-speaking folks that had migrated into the area as farmers, as traders, as iron workers, so on and so forth. In East Africa, you have archaeologists like Dr. Freda Mbogore, who works out of, where's she at? The British Institute of Eastern Africa. But she used to be the director of she was in charge of antiquities for Kenya at some point as well. But she's also the president of the Pan-African Archaeological Association. And I bring these people up because I want to highlight people that look like us that are doing this type of work at preserving our history, because it's important work. It's key for us to do the Sankofa right. And she writes books on humans and the environment. She has another book that came out, I think, in 2015. Yeah, 2015, Population and Ceramic Traditions, Revisiting the Tanaware of Coastal Kenya. And this starts in our time period, right when our course ends, around 711. Again, these are all Bantu-speaking populations that these folks are studying in East Africa and in Southern Africa. The archaeologists also work in tandem with the linguistic specialists that do things like, and this is a big word, so if you're at a family gathering, you want to impress somebody, you want to say, hey, you ever heard about glottochronology? Glottochronology. This will make you sound real smart, especially if you're coming back from college or something like that. You want to show your people that you know what you're talking about. All it is the study of the rate of change of vocabulary in a language. So this can be used by linguists to look at how people migrated, how they interacted, and how they exchanged words, and how those words changed over time. And they can tell us where people came from, how long they've been interacting with each other, who was the dominant group, so on and so forth. Because when we go back to, we look at this map, everything in orange are Bantu languages. Niger Congo B is what they're classified in by linguistics. So you see the language dispersal throughout Africa. So there's Nilo-Saharan languages that folks around Lake Chad and other places in North Central Africa speak, and even in this part of East Africa. You have the original Niger Congo languages before the dispersal. So everything in West Africa all the way up until really Wolof is kind of on this border between Afro-Asiatic and the Niger Congo languages. But what they speak in Guinea and Liberia and Sierra Leone and Ghana and Nigeria, these are the original Niger Congo languages. When the Bantu migration happens, folks from this region spread the Bantu language throughout this entire orange area. But when they do, they also adopt some vocabulary from the Khoisan people, from the Twa people, so you see those interactions. Madagascar is a whole nother situation of itself, because they speak a language very similar to what's spoken by the indigenous people of Australia, people in Malaysia and other places, because the migration from Madagascar actually came from the east to west, as opposed to west to east. So we got these language families. So within the Bantu, again, there's hundreds of languages that share common vocabulary, that express a shared common original culture. Now that culture morphed and changed as it went to different places, like all cultures do, because all cultures change. But there are some key things that I'll talk about at the end of this class that unite Bantu culture and Bantu language. All right. So just to give you a scope of the size of this migration, because this is another thing I like to point out when I talk about the Bantu migrations, is the actual size of Africa, because most maps don't really show it the way it express it the way it should be. This is a map of the United States. The United States can fit inside of Africa like 3 times with space left over. You can fit the United States, all of Western Europe, all of Eastern Europe, India, China, Japan, and the UK, all inside of Africa with room to spare. This is how big Africa is. So when we talk about this migration, that took place between 3000 BCE and 1000 CE, so those 4000 years, those people made it a long way. And even today, there's only about 1 billion and something people in Africa. Africa is still not densely populated for the amount of territory that's in Africa. So it's just something to think about when we talk about the scope of this and the amount of ethnic groups and nations that were created as a result of this migration. All right, so what happened when these folks interacted with each other, when we start to see this migration? Just a quick chart. Things that they shared, they intermarried. So the Twa people intermarried with the Bantus. The Khoisan people intermarried with the Bantus. They exchanged terms. Like I said, their languages start to things. The Khoisan people are known for the click in their language. If you listen to Southern Africans, there's that click thing. That became incorporated into a lot of the Bantu languages. So, for example, Zulu is a Bantu language. It's classified as a Bantu language, but it has elements of Khoisan language in it. This is in Southern Africa. Among certain languages in Central Africa, there are Twa words, particularly for things going on in the forest, that the Bantus adopted into their language. So we got exchange of terms. They formed symbiotic economic social relations, which I mentioned before. So the forest people provide forest goods, the farmers will provide farming goods. So the Bantus provide farming goods. The Bantu speakers about agriculture. Some of them became herders, and this becomes incredibly important. I'll go back to this point in a second. They produced ceramics, which we talked about last week, forged and smelted iron. They had higher birth rates, and they were more socially stratified. They came from places with chiefs and initiated men's groups, women's groups, this type of thing, whereas the indigenous people were much more socially equal. They were foragers and hunters. They were more mobile communities. These were more sedentary. Now, although we're talking about migrations, people weren't moving all the time. That's a 4,000-year process. Some people would settle down and they would stay there until there was social conflict or environmental conflict, and then they would move. But that's over generations. These were pretty much settled societies, whereas the indigenous people, whether it's the Khoisan or the Twa, they were much more mobile. They would follow animals. They would follow the seasons. They would set up camps and move at different times. So much more mobile. Loosely centralized. They relied on stone tools. Some horticulture, they had gardens, but not agriculture, not farms. And the communities, some communities produced ceramics, but very few. Most of them didn't have ceramics. So these are the differences between the groups that came and the groups that were already there. Now, going back to this discussion on herding, and then we'll take a break. This segment of the Bantus, when they get to this area here, on the fringes of, so remember, the one group goes straight into the rainforest. One group is on the fringes of the rainforest, which is a savanna area. As they get further east, they're interacting with Africans that are already in this region. So we're talking about Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, and they adopt animal herding. They didn't have that in Nigeria and Cameroon. They were mostly farmers. They were mostly forest people here in Nigeria and Cameroon that developed farming and iron technology. But once they get to the east, then they start to adopt animal herding as well. So this group of the Bantu migration, this wave, they have a mixed economy, farming and animal herding. So when they start to spread further south, they spread rapidly because they have multiple forms of economic diversity, as opposed to the group on this side. With that economic diversity, however, though, comes social stratification. We see this in societies with animal herding, with cattle herding, and those types of things, that men become much more dominant in those societies politically and economically because they have control over the cattle. And we see more gender inequality in those types of societies than we do in farming, generally, not always, but generally. So that happens as a result. So those societies develop a little bit differently than the ones that just stick pretty much to farming. And we'll see how that plays out actually in the next course when we do part 2 of this class. But they spread incredibly rapidly, and they form huge political kingdoms. Later on, another thing we'll talk about, as they're moving and as they're setting up kingdoms, they're also interacting with the Eastern world, with Indonesia, with Malaysia, and even as far east as China. And this East African region becomes interconnected with global trade. We'll talk about this more in part 2 of this class when it really comes up. But the goods that come into Africa change things as well. When the banana crop comes into Africa, because bananas aren't indigenous to Africa, bananas, plantains, those types of things, that changes things in the Great Lake regions for the Bantus that migrate here, and other crops that come in. So, but we'll talk about that in a few months when we do part 2 of this class. All right. With that being said, we'll take a break. I talked about iron already. We'll take a break, and then I'll introduce you to some teaching apprentices. So, any questions in the chat, Daniel, or does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask?
There's nothing in the chat, but Mr. Thomas has his hand up.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, go ahead.
Morning, all. It is very strange that this morning we're talking about equality. And then when I look at the whole situation, that Black has been accepted as a race. And I wonder if there has ever been any attempt to separate the races. For instance, even in Jamaica, when they had the slave trade, they used to put different slaves from different parts of Africa so that they couldn't learn or plot how to rebel. So how is it that we end up with Black as a race and nothing else?
That's a good question. Two phenomena happen with that. So even though slave masters did that, they couldn't do it effectively, and we found ways to communicate. And we were communicating with each other in Africa. So although they tried that, it wasn't completely successful, because the exploitation and the oppression of enslavement will bring people together, even that maybe couldn't speak to each other before. So they would form new languages, like the patois we hear in Jamaica is a combination of various African languages with English and a little bit of Spanish and that type of thing. So those types of things were created, and through that process, and then also through the process of people forgetting what exact ethnic group they came from and what nation they came from in Africa, we start to see the adoption of this Black identity. And it's still something that's happening today, because many of us in Canada are either first or second generation born in Canada, even still. So we come from places where Blackness is not a thing, really. I mean, if you live in Nigeria, you're not thinking about yourself in terms of Blackness. You're thinking about yourself in terms of religion, thinking about yourself in terms of ethnicity, not thinking about Black. But when you come to Canada, you're put in this category of Black. And then especially your children or your grandchildren who may not know much about Nigeria and Nigerian interactions, unless they're really engaged in the Nigerian cultural society, they just become Black. They just say they're Black, and then generation to generation, it just becomes the thing. So we have that, and there's some positives and negatives to that. I would say, well, I think it's a different conversation for a different time. I won't get into the balance of that, but it is an interesting phenomenon, the creation of Blackness, and even the creation of whiteness, because white wasn't really a thing historically until the slave trade, and people need to be differentiated in terms of race. So it's an interesting concept that we're still struggling with, but it's one that we can use to build together with for greater liberation. So that's an interesting point that you bring up.
But even so, though, that tells us that in retrospect, we really don't know from whence we come.
But we can find out. We don't sometimes, but we can find out, because those records are still, like you said, when they separated people, they did that and then kept the records. So they know when they pick people up, all right, we got these people from what's now Ghana. We got these people from what's now Nigeria. We know that these people are Igbo. We know that these people are Congolese. So those records still exist. So that work can be done. And genetics actually works. So you can actually use the genetic information to find out, not exactly, but pretty close where folks are coming from and what their African ethnicity is. You can do that. You can do that type of research to find those things out. So it's not completely lost. And again, even if it is lost, it's not the end of the world, in that social identities are always constructed, deconstructed, and rebuilt. So, for instance, the Bantu migration I was just talking about, Bantu is not really an identity per se. If you go into Central Africa, you go into South Africa, East Africa, people are going to tell you, I'm Zulu, I'm Tutsi, Kikuyu, whatever, Shona. No one's gonna say I'm Bantu. I mean, unless you're in South Africa and during apartheid. So those identities are what's prominent. But even those weren't always a thing. Like Zulu was a small group before Shaka turned into an empire. So that wouldn't, the Amazulu wouldn't even be an identity that a lot of people would have claimed prior to that. Same thing with something like Yoruba. Yoruba is a relatively new social identity. Before that, people identified with the kingdoms, even though they all spoke Yoruba languages. So these things change, and they will continue to change. Many of us, when we say what we always say, well, I'm Nigerian. Nigeria wasn't a social identity before the 20th century. I'm Ghanaian. Ghanaian wasn't a social identity before 1957 because the place was called the Gold Coast. So with these identities changing, the real question is, what are we doing with them? What are we doing with these identities? Are we using them to forge greater liberation strategies to make everybody's life better? Or are we just relying on them as, cultural markers, but we're not actually doing anything with them politically or economically to better our current situation? So I think that's the more important question to ask with these identities. What are we doing with them? And how is that benefiting these people that are called Black or African globally, that are catching so much hell wherever they're at on the earth? If you're Black, if you're African and you're in North America, you're catching hell. If you're Black, you're African and you're in South America, you're catching hell. If you go to Europe, you're catching hell. Even when Russia invades Ukraine, it's still somehow Black students that are catching hell, even though they don't got nothing to do with the conflict. And then if you're on the continent, because of neocolonialism, we're catching hell. So the question is, what is that identity doing to stop those people that are called Black, that are called African, that are suffering from these various forms of oppression? How do we use it to fight against that? I think that's a more important question that we should ask. Any other hands, Daniel, or questions in the chat?
Yes, Gloria has her hand up.
Okay. Miss Gloria, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just unmuting here. I just wanted to add to that thing about where we came from, our identity or roots. I was fortunate enough to know both of my grandfathers who lived into their 90s, and this is where oral history can play a big part. Mm-hmm. I remember my grandfather talking about his cousin Ketu and Kubena and names like that. They didn't say they were from Ghana. They didn't mention Ashanti or anything like that. But based on what they said, and especially when I came to Canada and met Ghanaians, I was able to make the link. So this is where I'm from. So it just so happened that on both sides, i.e. maternal and paternal sides, that I realized that my roots are of the Ashanti people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually a really good thing that particularly that cultural group, that Akan cultural group coming out of what's now Ghana, even Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire to some extent, those day names, because there's only 7 names. So if your name is Kwame, your name is Kwesi, your name is Kofi, you could bet that, and those names, and Kojo, those names survived into throughout the slavery period, so people can go back. And we can even use things like, again, the records of the various Europeans that brought people into slavery, because they all operated out of certain parts of Africa. So if you're from Haiti, your people probably came from either Congo, because the French got a lot of their Africans from Angola, Congo, Central Africa area, or Nigeria, because many of the slaves from what's now Benin and Southwest Nigeria, Yoruba, end up in Haiti. So
He's from Ghana.
yeah, you get that. Yeah, please mute if you can. Yeah, so all of these names you can trace back. So that's a very important point. Please mute. All right. Any other questions? Any other questions?
So my last point then is,
Yes.
we are where I find myself handicapped again, because I've come to believe that if, as is stated, if you don't know where you're coming from, you have no idea where you're going. So in that sense, when I look at it from that sense, I find myself totally handicapped.
You don't have to be. And here's why. Because even if you don't know exactly where your people are from, you haven't, that actually makes it better, because now, like, a lot of people say, well, we just claim all of Africa, which is good in an extent, because African people all over the world, like I mentioned before, are catching this type of exploitation. So you can connect yourself to the entire struggle of African people. And that's where we're going. Where we're going is to end that exploitation of anybody that comes from that continent, or descendant of people that come from that continent. So the way it doesn't handicap you, it actually liberates you, because now instead of worrying about one part of Africa and African people, you can worry about African people all over the world and fight. Where we're going is to fight for their development and their freedom. So these are good discussions. But I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause it here now, because what I want to open up to now are three young people that will introduce themselves that have been working with the Coppin African Teachers Institute this summer. It's a 6-week program that introduces students to the art and science of teaching African world history. It's named after a great educator slash ancestor named Fanny Jackson Coppin, who worked at the Institute for Colored Youth in the 1800s, from 1860s to the 1880s, before she went to South Africa and opened up educational institutes there. She was born in slavery. She got her freedom. She ended up being the second Black woman to get a degree. She got her degree from Oberlin College in Ohio. And while she was working on the degree, enslavement was still going on. And as Black people would escape from the South into Ohio, she taught them to read and write before moving on to Philadelphia and working at the Institute for Colored Youth as its principal. And that institute is now Cheney University, where I've been working for the past 10 years. So I named it after her. I named the institute after her because she always wanted teaching to be connected with not just the university, but also with the community. So with that spirit, we have a summer apprenticeship program. We have 3 young people that worked incredibly hard to create their own courses and to practice facilitating and teaching those courses. So I'm going to turn it over to them, because what they're going to talk about are communities that were impacted and that developed after the Bantu migrations. 2 of them are Bantu civilizations, and one is a civilization further to the east that you'll be introduced to. So let me go here first, and you'll hear about, we're going to make a clockwise turn through Africa. We're going to talk about Central Africa and the civilization in Southeastern Africa, and then we're going to go all the way up to Northeast Africa. So I'll turn it over, and I'll allow the first student to introduce herself.
All right.
And you'll need to click it.
All right. So, hi, my name is Nema Ndinsil, and I'm 18 years old, just graduated from high school. I am Congolese and Kenyan, but I have more Congolese blood in me since my mom is half Kenyan and half Congolese. And therefore, I have created courses that focus on the history of Congo And the presentation that you guys see right there is actually one of them. So it's the riches of the Kingdom of Congo. So I have 5 lessons in total. And the one that I'm going to show for today is actually not this one, but the last one. So if I'm not wrong, it's called Congo Art of Figures. So should I just click? Oh,
Oh,
wait,
go back. I'm not sure which one.
yeah, no, no, actually.
Ah, okay, that's the one that.
But worst comes to worst, I can also present this one as well. It's totally fine. Um, so yeah, so this is my presentation of riches of the Kingdom of Congo. So we're just going to go through it briefly, and I also put a few pop quiz. If you guys want to participate, that's totally fine, and if not, it's fine as well. Depends on how comfortable you guys feel. So for this presentation, we're gonna start prior to the Portuguese arrival. So before we even talk about that, I just want to briefly explain how Congo used to be known as the Kingdom of Congo, and it was actually Congo with a K and not a C. But after colonization and everything, like they changed the K to a C. So yeah, so prior to the arrival of the Portuguese, the kingdom would melt copper and gold, and they were also very large into the trading business. So they had large commercial network, and the common trades that they would do, they would often trade copper and ivory, and also raffia cloth and pottery. And now, a few political rules that they used to have was that the kingdom had 12 provinces, and those 12 provinces had 12 governors as well. And whenever a king would die, there were 12 counselors that would gather and they would have to pick a new king. And sometimes it would take months and even years before that decision could be made. And the name that they used to have for a king was Mani or Ne. And that was to also designate a person with authority. So for the kingdom expansion, so the Kingdom of Congo was one of the largest kingdom in Africa, and they didn't really have any military army per se. However, they had strong men who were chosen to protect women and children and also the elderly. And other kingdoms had become a part of the Kingdom of Congo. And as long as they followed their laws, they were allowed to also become a part of the Kingdom of Congo. So that's kind of how they grew as well. And provinces were allowed to leave the kingdom however they pleased, and there wasn't any opposition from the central government. So, in other words, it was pretty much laid back. And that also kind of revealed a lack of resistance in the kingdom, and that's how more provinces began to separate. So now a little pop quiz for those who want to participate. So just to test a bit of your attention span. So this is a bit of a fill in the blank. So for the political rules, whenever a king died, how many counselors would gather? So we're just going to start off with that. How many counselors would gather?
Well,
I'm sorry?
well,
12, exactly. So yeah, 12 counselors would gather. And what would they gather for? So to fill in the blank.
to select a new king.
Exactly. So to pick a new king. So blank and blank would pass when choosing a new king. So what would pass?
months or even years.
Exactly. So months or even years would pass before they select a new king. And now we'll talk about the kingdom expansion. So the Kingdom of Congo was one of the blank kingdoms.
Largest.
Exactly. So it was one of the largest kingdoms in Africa. However, they didn't have any.
Military.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
there wasn't any military army per se. And then here, so prior to the Portuguese arrival, common trades that were in Congo were, I gave a bit of a hint. So the first one is, sorry?
Iron ore.
Exactly, yeah. There's iron and, ivory, sorry. So the one with the C,
Copper, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the one with the C is copper, and the one with the R,
Oh, I'm gonna get it wrong. I know it has something to do with cloth, but I can't remember the name.
Raffia, Raffia?
yeah, so it's raffia cloth. And then the last one, the one with the P,
Was it pottery? I don't remember.
so yeah, so the last one with the P was pottery.
Okay.
All right. So now we'll talk again about a bit of the kingdom expansion. So the Kingdom of Congo had covered parts of Angola, and that was around the 1650. And this is a closer view of the map. And as we can see, it's really like in this region right here. So here is Angola. And yeah, so now we'll talk a bit of Congo fashion. So, like I had said earlier, raffia fiber or raffia cloth was often used for the clothes, and the fiber had to be combed, and the natural color of raffia was deep gold. But there were also different shades that they would use, such as red, blue, and yellow, which is primary colors, and those colors came from colorants from plants, and they also came from minerals that were found in clay. Now, another pop quiz. So this is from a bit earlier. So let's see if you remember. So, what would the Kingdom of Congo melt? Was it minerals and gold, copper and gold, raffia and copper, or raffia and iron?
I think it's
Anyone wants
number
to
two.
try? So yeah, it's sorry.
Raffia and iron.
It's actually not raffia and iron, but it's copper and gold. So yeah, but it's a good attempt anyways. So yeah, copper and gold. It was very common for the Kingdom of Congo to melt copper and gold. Now here, one of the things the kingdom was mostly known for was it their music or minerals found in clay, major trading business, or their production of oil. Right? So it's their major trading business.
Mhm.
So the Kingdom of Congo was very known for trading. And what name was designated to a king or person of authority? Was it Ra or Ya, king or emperor, Ne or Mani, or just ruler?
Money.
Or many.
Exactly. So it's Ne or Mani. Oh, And yeah, that actually concludes my little presentation.
Did you want to
So,
say? I know you were saying. Did you want to just say anything about the art that you were going to mention?
well, there wasn't anything in
Oh, okay.
particular. But yeah, so my four other courses, I mean, my four other lessons, sorry, we talk about Bakongo culture, and we talk about the art in objects for Congo. We also talk about Congo before colonization, and we also talk about, uh, oh, I forgot the last one. Oh yeah, we also talk about the riches of Congo. If I'm not wrong, I may have made a mistake, but yeah. So brief history on Congo and its kingdom, and yeah.
And the course that you created, what levels of?
The level, it's mostly for high school students, so that's why I try to do activities that really test the attention span, because I know for high school students, most of the time they have a shorter attention span, and yeah.
Shorter than seniors,
Sorry.
is your attention span shorter than that of seniors?
Oh, kind of actually, I would say. But every person has their own attention span. So at the end of the day, it really like it can educate anyone. But yeah.
All
So
right.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Miss Densu.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment that I know raffia as a, like a fiber, like in Jamaica, in the craft, they use it to decorate baskets or things like that. Yeah, it has a sort of straw look. I was surprised that you were
Yeah.
using the cloth.
And it's unfortunate I couldn't find any good image for. Sorry, I'll just go back for the cloth being used, but yeah, it's used for many different things, but in Congo they would use it like for their clothes. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go in the craft market, like in Kingston, if the women are sitting there making their craft, while they're selling, and they would be using, they have these big eye needles threaded with raffia, and then they would be doing designs and baskets, like writing the word Jamaica or drawing something. That's my knowledge of raffia.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure I've also seen some baskets made out of raffia, and the art and the crafting behind it's very interesting, I find.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
But yeah,
Thank you. That was very
thank you very
informative.
much.
Okay. Hello, my name is Benjamin Shimwa. I'm a student, high school student, and this is my second year with the Coping African Institution. And today I'm doing a presentation on Malawi. Do any of you know what Malawi is and where it is, or have you ever heard of like the country? Yeah, probably not. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this presentation, because most of the time when people ask me where I'm from, I'm like, I'm from Malawi, and they're just like, I don't know where that is, right? So I took this time to start educating people about Malawi, the history, and this is just a brief introduction of my course and what it will really be all about. So this will be the course objective. We develop a formal understanding of Malawi, recount key nations, figures, and events to our Malawi history, receive a clear of what the course will be about. So the first thing about Malawi is that it is the warm heart of Africa, right? That's what it's not about, because it's so welcoming. And when you go to Malawi, they'll treat you as their own. You will not get discriminated or pushed away, right? And that's one of the things about Malawi that makes it so special. It's like there's different cultures and they love to share with anyone. And the main nations of Malawi are these six. The Chewa is the first one. It's the biggest population, and it's also a Bantu tribe. And the it first came from the first millennial when the Bantu were migrating. And the next one is the Yao, who are very much known of this thing called Gulewankulu. It's a very secretive group, and they do rituals and um, a lot of things with the dead. It's a very it's I'll talk about this in my course. It's very interesting. There's the Tumbuka, which is also another Bantu tribe, and it really comes from Swahili. It's very similar. There's the Lomwe, who came from Mozambique because of a lot of national wars, and there's the Sena. They use other people's eyes as a charm for catching more fish in the Shears River. They are more into the fishing in the Lake Malawi, which is a very important geographical figure in Malawi. And then there's the Ngoni, who fled from Shaka Zulu in the 1891. Okay. Now, the geography. So, Malawi is located right near Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and a lot about near Mozambique. It's a East African. It's really small, so it's kind of hard to see where it is while it's surrounded like by big countries around it. So it's always really easy to miss it. But this is where Malawi is located, and right here is Lake Malawi, right? And one thing about Malawi, it's separated in three regions: the northern region, central region, and southern region. Right, in each region, there's districts, and as the capital city being Lilongwe. And one of the most important thing is the Lake Malawi, right? As you can see, there's a little border right here with Mozambique. Yeah, it's not Mozambique's water, it's still Malawi's water. They do whatever it takes to maintain the lake because it's really what they have for like tourism, fishing. Because outside of from that, there's still a couple of rivers, but they do not really distribute much water. And for the history, right? So here are the key dates, right? So the first one is the Bantu arrival of the Chewa and the Tumbugo, who are really the main two tribes, main two nations of Malawi. And then it comes to the Maravi Kingdom, who is the biggest nation and kingdom in all of Malawi history. And they're also a Bantu, but they migrated from Congo all the way to Malawi. And I'll also teach about this in my course. So this for the 4 weeks, this is really the course outline, and also talk about the slave trade of the Omani people and the Swahili who came to Malawi. They had to build a relationship, and then Malawians were betrayed by them when slave trade happened. And then there's the 1907 when the British colonized Malawi, and they called it Nyasaland. And Nyasa in Chichewa means dirty. So it referred to dirty land. Even Lake Malawi during that time was also called Lake Nyasa, right? It was always a way for British to say that we have power over you. And one of the leaders and the first president, and also the person that liberated Malawi from the British colony, his name is Hastings Banda, right? But his real name is Kamuzu Banda, but he changed it to fit the white standard and the British standard so he can get more power into making Malawi and the independence. And the state of Malawi in the 21st century. So Malawi is very reliant on its geography, right? Most of it is about agricultural, and without agricultural, it's really hard. So Malawi has been going through a lot of drought, and meaning they cannot farm or do anything, and that has really made it like one of the poorest countries in the world, and its value of like currency is really low, plus a lot of corruption from our presidents, right? A lot of the presidents just don't run to help the country, they just run because they want power. And like one of the presidents really just ran because his brother was once president and he just wanted to fill his brother's position. And yeah, so for the last one, English influence on Chichewa, which is the main language of Malawi, is so great, right? In English, the word school in Chichewa, we call it sikulu, right? I have tried to find the real meaning. Even if you go on any translation, go on Google Translate English Chichewa, you say school, it will give you sikulu, which is just like really bad. Like a lot of original dialogue of Chichewa has been lost throughout, right? Even Siponi, it's just one of those things that slowly, like it's been getting messed up. And thank you very much. That's my course, and you can also sign up if you want. I can give you. You can put on email, and I'll reach out to you. Thank you. And if you have any questions,
Any questions for Benjamin? And if you do, you could put it in the chat. Or Daniel, did you see anything? Any hands?
I would like to ask a question, Dr. Ledbetter.
Yes.
For both of the two young people who made the presentations, I'm wondering, do they have an opportunity to do the presentation in a high school in Ottawa?
Perfect question for you, Benjamin. Go ahead. You can talk about your experience.
yes, we do, because last year on no this year on Black History Month, I was able to do a presentation for elementary school kids during Black History Month, right? I taught them about Black excellence and what it's about and how you can learn it. So we do have opportunities to teach in schools and high schools or even elementary schools.
The only other thing that I would like to say is that with people like these two young ones, the educational future seems to be in very good hands.
And we have one more. We have one more. We just need to set up numbers. Did you send me the slides? Okay, so you can start by introducing yourself, and I'll set up your slides.
Hi, my name is Asma Salad. I come from Somalia. I'm a second generation immigrant, and the high school I go to is Hillcrest High School, which is on the south part of Ottawa. And my presentation is about how Somalia came to be and the effects that happened after its civilization began.
One second, everybody. Still trying. Yeah, technical. Okay. And you want these after the original one? Okay. All right. It should be straight. Let me just refresh this. All right. You got
So
the clicker. You might want to grab the clicker behind you. Yeah, there you go.
okay, so the civilization started around the 8th century during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they ran from the Arabians, certain Arabians. They ran because of they were aggrieved Muslims who were like they were aggrieved, obviously. Sorry. And then they ran to Somalia to seek a greater future. And at the time, they were called the people of Berberi. And then, but everyone has different stories. Like I heard, for example, that I'm related to one of my clan. One of my clan leaders is related to the Prophet himself. Anyways, the founders, the name Somalia came from one of the great founders, apparently. and his name was Somale, which obviously turned into Somalia. And Somalia is divided into two parts of the country. There's four major clans who are pastoral clans, and there's agricultural clans. Pastoral means when they're more focused on like animals and farming and stuff like that. Okay. The six major clan families are Darod, the Dir, Rahanwain, Digil, Isaac, and Hawiya. Pastoral clans are the Dir, um, Darod, Hawiya, and Isaac. Agricultural clans are the Rahanwain and Digil, and then they are near the Juba and Shibil rivers. They're near the Juba and Shibil rivers because that's where all the water is. And then it's really hard to find water in Somalia because it's hot country, obviously. So they were forced to be around those areas. And the pastoral clans chose a different lifestyle from that because of how difficult it is to get the water as well. And then, but like controversies with clans are real. Um, I personally come from the Darod clan, and then many stories that I've heard is we're very like tight knit with our own clan, and we sort of push out anyone else. Like there's a lot of conflict between us. Okay. Somalia is a very multilingual country. It was occupied by the Ottoman Turks in Yemen, so there is different dialects, and it was colonized by Italy, Britain, and France, and that caused a great separation in our population as well. Like, yeah. Which countries affected Somalia? Egypt, Ethiopia, England, and Italy all came first. Egypt was the first one to conquer us, and then England and Italy came and tried pushing every other country out. Ethiopia claimed that Somalia was part of their land, but then England and France went to the Berlin Conference, and Ethiopia wasn't invited, so they took matters into their own hands, and then England and France agreed to split the certain territories for themselves, and Spain, England, and all these other countries were kind of fizzled out. And France, Spain, and England were the only countries that actually fought for the land. They fought in the French and Indian War. Okay, Côte Française des Somalie is what they used to call Djibouti at the time. Djibouti is this country right here, and that was occupied by France, and now one of the main languages there is French. So if you meet a Djibouti, they're 100% no French. Italy, Britain, and Ethiopia. Yeah, I already talked about this. Coast and North. Okay, so Italy and Britain, they divided the coast. So Italy, I believe, took the coast of Somalia, and then Britain took the north of Somalia. So that's how they divided their territory. And they did it by forcing out other countries. Okay. And one of the reasons why Somalia wasn't like one of the countries, the African countries that were affected by slavery was because of the distance. It was too great of a distance for the Europeans to travel to seek resources from there, and they thought it wasn't worth the resources that they would spend by constantly traveling back and forth. And one of the second reason is religion slavery. Since Somalia is a country populated more than 99% of it are Muslims, they thought that they were too like hard-headed to even occupy because they have so much like they're not easy people to influence, and they've already been through previous griefs in the beginning of their time. Anyways, thank you for listening to my presentation. That's it.
Hey, so before you, how have you found the experience this summer learning about, so how much have you learned that you didn't know before?
I learned a bunch of the clan names. I
Oh.
only knew my own. names,
Yeah.
And also, I did not know. I was always wondered why they were never conquered by slavery, and I found out the reasons. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
anyone have any questions?
Any questions? Anything?
Do you understand why there are so many languages and why there seems to be no peace between different languages?
Okay, so the reason that there were so many languages, I mean, there is only one original language, Somali, but since both like it was influenced by Italy and Britain, and certain parts of the country were influenced more than the others, so in the language was also colonized, and we do have some Italian in our language, and we do have French, which the Djiboutis mostly have, and we do have English words that we didn't have in Somali, so we just kept them as their original English words.
And my last question would be, do you get a feel or an understanding as to why there is so much confusion and misinformation about Somalia as it stands today?
Oh, Somalis do have a kind of complex that they're better than other people, I'll be honest, which is controversial. They, I don't know, because they weren't conquered by slavery, so I guess they thought that maybe that, I don't know, they were different from the other countries, and also because we originally came from the Middle East, so a lot of some Somalis, some don't. They think that they're Arab, but they're not.
This is a good observation. I do have a question.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Miss Gloria. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that there were so many groups, to me, because I was in Canada before the wave of Somalians, and I just see Somalians as Somalians. So I was surprised to hear there were so many groups. What I want to know, does this division carry over into, say, places like Canada or Ottawa? Like, do people stick to their groups, or is there more?
Yeah. Yes, we do.
At Somalians, or rather at your separate groups?
Yes, we do. Usually, like, for example, I've been to many clan barbecues when I was younger. And for example, the other day, my mom, she was walking home and she got tired. So she went into the car of some other Somali auntie because she found out that they're from the same clan. So, yes, they're very close together. Yes.
Yeah, that is something I learned today. I had no idea that there was a separation.
And that's very interesting. It goes back to that conversation we talked about earlier about identity. There's an internal identity, and then there's the external that's put on people, like blackness. Like if we walk out this room and a white person sees us, they're gonna say there's some black people. But my people are from the States and from Guinea. You're Congolese. Benjamin is from Malawi. You're Somali. And then even within Somali, for other people, you might say I'm Somali. But if you're among other Somalis, you're going to say what clan you're from. So these multiple identities, it's really interesting when we combine that with history. Because I'm asking you to do a history of Somalia, but in Somalia, somebody might say, well, do a history just of your clan and teach that class. So it's interesting how all these things change. And then what are we, again, I always say, what are we doing with that? Because when we look back at recent history, when that Somali brother was killed by the police a few years ago, the entire black community of Ottawa said, no, this is one of us. This is not about what clan he is, what Somali clan he is. It's not even the fact that he's just Somali. He's black. So because somebody black got killed by the police, we're all coming together and we're all going to protest this. So it's amazing how we use these identities and to pull us together when we see injustice. And I think that's an important thing to do. So that's why when we talk about African history, what we saw this morning was history that spanned different ethnic groups, different nations. We're all building because have you ever learned about Somali history in school?
No.
No. If you have the two of you, have you learned about Congolese, Malawi history? No. So this is the type of work that we're doing, and I'm thankful for the three of you for engaging in this work and continuing to build because they're still continuing, they're still learning. They only did 6 weeks of this work, and I've been doing this work since 1994, and I'm still constantly learning. So as they're beginning to learn and grow and teach other people, we're grateful for them. I think I think there's a question. I saw a hand. Was that someone had their hand up? Daniel, did the hand come up? Oh, go ahead. Yes, sir.
I want to find out Djibouti, as far as I know, is a recent, relatively speaking, recent breakaway from Somalia. Do you know what year it became a separate country?
I think maybe in the 1970s. I don't know the exact time. But also, it also separated into Somaliland, which is the upper part of Somalia. They claimed Somaliland to be their own country.
Thank you.
Somalia, and all of these places that we mentioned today. And thank you for that. Thank all three of you, and I have digital certificates for you that I'll send to you. All of these places are extremely strategic. Somalia is one of the most strategically located places in the world. The Congo is the richest place on one of the richest territories in the world and bordered by 10 other countries. And Lake Malawi is one of the most important freshwater sources that we have on Earth. So extremely important places, contemporary and with a lot of history that we can talk about. We're going to stop today. But next week, what we're going to go into, we're going to go back. We're going to go right where we left off because we're going to be talking about Northeast Africa. So we're going to be talking about Somalia. We're going to be talking about the Horn of Africa. We're talking about Ethiopia and the Kingdom of Aksum and its invasion of Nubia from the south. We'll talk about the emergence of Christianity in North Africa. And then in week 8, we'll talk about Islam in Africa. So we're going right back in that counterclockwise direction. So we'll stop there for today. Again, I want to thank Mr. Shimon. I call them Mr. and Mrs. because they're going to be teachers in some way. Even if they don't become teachers, they'll always know how to teach. So whatever professions they go into, they'll know how to teach. So Mr. Shimwa, Ms. Salad, Ms. Densil, thank you again. Your incredible work. Yeah, so we're moving forward. So everyone that joined us, thank you. We're going to turn off the recording and have any discussion that folks would like to have. So thank you again. Recording is off. Okay. All right. Thank you all. You don't have to stay for this part if you don't want to. You guys did amazing. And I'm going to send you a follow-up email with your certificates, with everything. Yeah, great job. Great work, y'all.